working with database. Up to now, we have seen how to work with Excel files in Python, data-driven testing using data in Excel file for data-driven testing. So for data-driven testing, we need to know how to handle Excel files, and also we'll specify our data instead of Excel files in databases. So we need to know how we can work with database. It is very important. So quickly going on, what is a database? So a database is nothing but a memory location where we store data. Database, it is a base for storing the data. That name itself says. Then database itself is not a single component. It is having server and client. So what the server will do, it will store actual data in the form of tables. In the tables, we are having rows and columns. So whatever the data you want to store or you will store will be stored in the server. It's like a file manager in your mobile. Whatever you do, in which application you do, all the things will be stored in the file manager. Or I can say internal memory of that particular phone. So client is like a file manager application for interacting with this memory location in your phone. In the similar way, huge data will be generated for the companies, nothing but enterprise data. They need to store the data, so they will store in server. So what the developers or QAs will do, there may be times where you need to fetch the data from the server and you need to check whether the same data is present in the application or not, UI or not. Also, every operation you do on the website, like I can say Amazon.com. Let me try to verify this GAP. If you can see this, suppose if you log in here, create a list registry or sign in, or if you create a register here, then that registry data will be stored in the server. So actual data is stored in the server, and as a user, I need to see the data. What is the data? So for seeing the data, I will use client software. In most of the companies, we will use dbeaver as a client software. Very important. So it is the client just only seeing the data, doing for CRUD operations, nothing but whatever the data it is stored in the server, we will just do CRUD operations, nothing but create the data if required, read the data, update the existing data, and delete the data. These operations we will do with the help of client. And most of the times, the database server is located on the remote machines. So what you do, with the help of client software in your local machine, you will connect to this particular server. They will give all the details like password, username. They will give all the details. So with the help of those details, we will connect to that particular server. But when we install some software, suppose MySQL or SQL Server or Oracle, for practice purpose, the server and the client both are installed at a time in our machine, just for practice. But in real time, you will not have server in your local machine. That server is located on some remote machines. Actual database server is installed on remote machines or remote machine. That machine is nothing but a computer having huge memory capacity. That's it. Then coming to client, it is a lightweight software through which we'll be able to connect to database from different locations. Suppose for practice, if you install database server, which we'll be installing right now, by default, we'll get client software, but this is not the case. That server, database server will be on some remote machine, and we'll just connect it to that server using that client. Then what are the different types of client softwares? MySQL, for MySQL, we are having SQL Workbench. Similarly, for Oracle, if it is an Oracle database, SQL Developer, SQL Plus. For Microsoft SQL Server, we are having SQL Server Management Studio SSMS. So these are all native to that particular company. So once you install server, along with that server, you will get these client softwares. But in general, we will use dbeaver. So with the help of this, what we will do, we will connect it to all types of machines, like whether it is a SQL, MySQL, Oracle, SQL Server, Postgre. For connecting to all the servers of different types, we will use a dbeaver. It is very easy. Instead of trying to install all these types. So that's what I'm specifying here. In real time, we'll install databases on remote Linux machines, not on your machine. They are hosted on Linux machines. As like Windows, we'll have Linux operating systems. We'll install those databases on those remote machines, but not in our local machines. So who will maintain these databases? Administrators, database administrators. So they will provide access to developers and also for testers to perform operations. What are the operations? CRUD operations. So database administrators will provide all these things regarding access. So what developers and testers will do? Will only connect to database server with the help of client software. That's it. So we'll see how we can install that particular software. Nothing but server. This is the server which we'll be installing. And along with that, we'll get client software as well. But this is not the case. It is just for our practice purpose. Practice is very important. Then, what is SQL? SQL, structured query language. The language which we are using has some structure. So that is the reason. Structured query language. Querying means you are just asking for the data. Query, nothing but you are questioning in the form of CRUD, creating or reading or update or deleting. Then what is SQL? It is the language by which we can communicate with the database to perform operations. Database will understand only structured query language, whether it is any database, whether it is Oracle, whether it is MySQL or SQL Server, will only understand SQL language. So we need to ask to the server in the form of the language which it is knowing. Like you know English, I know English, I'm just communicating it through English. But I know some other native language, you know some another native language. But if I communicate in my native language, you will not understand. If you communicate in your native language, you will not, I will not understand. So English is the common language for interchanging the information. In the similar way, database will only understand SQL. You need to know how to deal with SQL. What is query then? It is a statement through which we can work with databases. We'll see in a while what is a query. Then what are SQL statements? So set of queries, I can say SQL statements. So in every database, SQL statements are almost same. They are same. So if we learn SQL from one database to another database, it will be same. We can work with other databases as well. Only SQL is the important language for interacting with databases. If you know SQL, you can work with Oracle with little modification. Similarly, SQL Server, MySQL, Postgre, etc. Then, what are the commands in SQL? Structured query language. DDL commands, data definition language, data manipulation language, DML commands, data retrieval, you are just retrieving the data. Data retrieval language, I can say, command I can say, TCL, transaction control language, DCL, data control language. So most of the times we will use as a developer or as a tester DDL, DML, DRL. Data definition language. You will define some data. Defining some data means you will create some data. So you will alter the data. If the data is not required, you will drop or truncate. Then data manipulation. Manipulate. You will manipulate the data. Whatever the data is there, you will just manipulate. Whether you need to increase a row or a column by inserting some data. You can update the existing data. You can delete the data. So drop and truncate belongs to tables. Delete belongs to data. That's it. So whatever the data is present in the table, you will just delete by using delete command. Then data retrieval. So as a tester, most of the times you will use select command. Select star, select all from so and so table, like that. Most of the times as a testers, we will use DRL commands. Only select comes under DRL, data retrieval language. Then what is transaction control language? Transaction. For every action you do on the database, it is nothing but a transaction. If you update the table or if you alter the table, it is nothing but a transaction. So you can commit the transaction, you can make the changes, or if the transaction is not as expected, then you can roll back that. Similarly, data control language. So control means you need to say whether that particular person is authorized person or not. So if he is an authorized person, you need to grant the permission for accessing the data in the database. If he is not required anymore, then you can revoke. You can remove the access for the person in the database. In this way, you can use TDL commands, DML commands, DRL, TCL, DCL. Very important interview question. They will ask you what are the different type of commands in SQL. That's it. You need to be in a position to answer this. And always we have seen UI testing with the help of a script. We are only testing the UI, the elements in the UI. But API testing and database testing, you will not do anything. You will not see and you will not do anything on the UI. Instead, you will do in the backend. Backend means related to data. So database testing comes under backend testing, which includes, we'll also do functional and non-functional testing. So functional means whether for the same type of the input, what is the output which I am getting. And coming to non-functional testing, if one user logged in or if 1,000 users logged in, what is the performance? Is it security? Like that, we will deal with different parameters. Then testers only do CRUD operations, nothing but creating the data, reading the data in the table, updating already existing data, deleting the data. That's it. These are CRUD operations. To thoroughly test the entire database, it is essential to examine not only data, nothing but not only CRUD operations, but also various aspects such as tables. We need to see relationship between those tables. What are the column data types? This is thorough testing of database. As a functional tester, if you are related to an ETL tester or something, you can do database testing. But as a UI tester, you will only be limited to CRUD operations. That's it. Don't worry with this. But in general, we will do this. Column sizes, normalizations, storage procedures, triggers, views, indexes, cursors, functions, etc. So which is combination of both black box testing and white box testing. Then Selenium is only used for functional testing of UI, not for database testing. We will not do any testing on the database with the help of Selenium. It is not possible. Selenium is only meant for UI level, functional testing. That's it. Of UI, not the database. Then, in order to work with databases, what are the different type of connectors available in Python? If you can see here, we have installed Selenium. We have installed Selenium. This is a library. OpenPyXL is a library. Suppose if you go to some another script, you have installed Selenium to work with UI testing. Similarly, to work with Excel files, you have imported OpenPyXL. This is a library. Similarly, in order to work with the databases, you need to have connectors. So what that connector will do? Nothing but it is a library like OpenPyXL or Selenium, like pandas. It will make a connection between the language which we are using or the query which we are writing and to the database. Suppose for MySQL, we are having MySQL connector Python. This is what we are having. So where you need to install, you can install go to file, settings, interpreter, and you can search for this particular connector. If you can see here, yes, this connector, okay, you can use this particular connector. In the similar way, PyMySQL for working with MySQL. See, these are different type of connectors. If you require anything, you can use. This is for MySQL. Then what about PostgreSQL? If it is a PostgreSQL database, I'm having different connector. PSYCOBC2. You can specify it here. So it will highlight that particular connector and you can click on install. Just that's it. You need to do. So likewise, you are having different connectors. For Oracle, you have CX_Oracle. For SQL Server, PyODBC. For Mongo, if you want to work with MongoDB databases, you have PyMongo. So these are different type of connectors, nothing but libraries with respect to Python, which if you want to work with databases, you need to install. Then before going to work with how to interact with databases using Python, definitely we need to have the database server along with its client in my local. Navigate to this particular link so that you can download MySQL database, nothing but server with its client. So scroll down and you can see the MySQL installer and along with the version 8.0.36. And so click on this particular download button, which is having highest MB, like 285.3 MB. So this is the file which you want if you want to install MySQL database along with its server and its client in your local. So what I have done, I have already downloaded this in my local. So going here and going to downloads, and if you can see, this has already been downloaded in my local. So double click on this to install. So for every database, as we discussed, we are having two components, server and client. So we are trying to install both here. If you can see, it is asking for setup type, whether you want only to install server, you want only the client like Workbench, or you want full. So whatever this MySQL company is offering to you, if you want, you can install all the full components. But in this case, I don't want all the components. I want only specific components. What are the specific components, which we'll be seeing in the next screen? So checkbox, click on this radio button, custom. So in the custom, we will only select the products which I want to install. Then click on next. And if you can see MySQL server, yes, I want the server to work with. So add this. Similarly, applications. So these are nothing but clients. So I want SQL Workbench client, shell and router. I don't want these two, shell and router, but I want only Workbench to communicate with the database server. So after adding these two, server and Workbench, click on next. And if you can see, ready to install. Once you click on execute, they will install in your local. It will take some time. Post this, we will be able to move ahead. Very important. So, but in general, you will not install all these things in your local. Rather, database administrator will provide you all the credentials. Just you need to use that. That's it. This is just for learning purpose. You are installing here. Workbench is installing. Almost 99% is completed. And yes, it is completed totally. Click on next. And MySQL server, I'm ready to configure this. So configure means you can just specify the port. Right now, you keep these or use this as the default port 3306. That's it. Click on next and use strong password encryption for authentication. So click on this first option instead of this legacy authentication method. So click on next, and if you can see, it is asking for, we have already one user whenever installing this particular SQL server on the client, nothing but root user. For that root user, it is asking for the password. So I'm just setting up a password as root, R-O-O-T. Let me write it again, R-O-O-T, root. All are small only. So root, R-O-O-T. And yes, even though password strength is weak, don't worry. Click on next. I'm giving the password as root. Please keep it or save it anywhere. Instead of root, if you want to use any another password, you can give. So upon giving the password for the root user, click on next and click on next. Yes, grant full access. Click on next and execute. So upon executing, all the configuration steps will be executed. Starting the server, security settings as well. Yes, finish. When you click on finish and click on next, click on finish, the server in the background is started, and so the workbench, MySQL workbench, is also started here. So this is the home page, and when you click on this particular connection which is already there, you will have this particular screen. In this particular screen, you are seeing administration and schemas. If you want to change anything as an administrator, you can change. You can start the server instance or stop the server instance. You can check the client connections. You can grant or revoke the permissions for the users along with their privileges. See, all the things you can do it in the administration window. Similarly, coming to schemas, in the schemas only you will be able to see what are the types of databases you will be having here in the schemas. So if you want to execute any query, so this is the query option, create a new SQL tab. So when you click on this, it will create a new tab for entering any SQL command or query. So this is what you need to know, and this is the console where you can see the output. So this is what you need to know. So what I'm doing, I'm just checking show databases, and again, SQL is a case insensitive language. Whether you give in capital case or whether you give in small case, it doesn't bother. It will try to perform the same operation. So what I'm doing, I'm just checking databases. What are the databases present in this? So databases. So after every command, it is better to give semicolon. So there will be a difference between commands, nothing but statements. So each statement can be executed individually if you want. So selecting this and click on this execute button. If you see, these are all the databases which we'll be having when you install this MySQL database. And if you can see here, information schema, MySQL performance schema, and system databases are the by default databases. They come along with installation. And this is what you are seeing here, system database. And information schema, MySQL performance schema, these are related to the system databases. So they are not used here. So that is the reason why they have not shown here. So here my requirement is, I want to create my own database. How I can create? So for creating own database, you can use create database, and you can give the database name. Suppose in my case, MyDB is the database. Thereafter, you can specify colon, and you can enter. And after selecting or place your cursor or mouse here and control enter. Once you click control enter, instead of selecting all and selecting clicking this particular execute button, so what you can do, you can highlight your mouse here, and thereafter you can just enter control plus enter. That's it. You can just press control plus enter. So upon clicking that, this particular statement or the query is executed, and so you can see the output action, create database. It has successfully executed, so green mark, and one row selected. And if you can see, and if you refresh this, you can see MyDB database has been created. And if you want to perform any actions on this database, you need to use the command query use MyDB. You need to use this. If you use this, means you are just saying use this MyDB. You are just use this particular database to perform all the operations which I want to do, like creating a table, inserting data, all the things. If you can see here, I'm just executing control plus enter. Just it has executed. Means we are just now using MyDB database. Then first thing which I can do is these are the database operations. We have created a database MyDB, used the database, and thereafter I need to create a student table. Very important. I need to create a student table. So for creating a table, you need to use create table and student. This is the table name. And for the table, you are having rows and columns. So you need to specify that column name. So SID is one column name, and similarly SName is column name. So SID is integer data type. You will only specify integer data type there. When you specify varchar data type, you are just specifying strings there. So for this particular name, always a name represented in strings. So that is the reason you need to specify that data type 2 for every column. So if you execute this, and if you click on refresh button, you can see table student has been created, and there is no data in the table. Select star from the table. To fetch all the rows from the table, you can use star. Select star from table. Which table? Student. You need to specify that student name. I mean, the table name. And if you execute that, you can see there is no data because we have just created only a table and we didn't enter any data. So that is the reason upon fetching, you are having just empty table. Then how I can insert data? For inserting data into a table, you have insert statement, insert into the table name. And what are all the values you need to insert? You can just specify that values inside bracket. So this particular value refers to ID column, SID column, and this particular John refers to SName column. Similarly, you are having 4 rows to be inserted into this particular table. This row, 103 and 104. Upon executing this, you will see it has successfully executed and 4 rows affected because 4 rows of data you are just entering. And if you can just select again, so these are all the data which you entered right now, which you inserted into this particular table. And SID is having 101, 102, 103, 104. These are all the integer data types. So you have specified that integer data type. And if you see name, SName is having a string, John, Emily, Michael, and Sarah. So these are strings. So varchar data type. And this 20 refers to the length of this name. Instead of 20, you can just specify 10. You can just specify 20 or 50 or any size of that particular varchar you can specify. You have just inserted this data into the student table. Now, my requirement is if I want to update a row in this particular table, if you can see here, these are the values which I have inserted. But my requirement is there is SID 104. For this SID, I am having the name as Sarah, but I don't want this name. I want to change that name to Mary. So changing is nothing but modifying. So if already the content is present, you can modify that. So for modifying data into the table, you need to use update command. So update, you need to specify that student name, and you can say that set the column name is equal to value where that ID you need to specify equal to 104. So suppose if I don't want to change 104, I want to change as 103, the SID is 103, then you can just specify that ID. In this case, I'm just changing Sarah to Mary. That's it. So if you click on enter, it will raise an error before. Because what I have done, I have gone to preferences, and in the SQL editor, if you can see, I have unchecked this save updates. So once I uncheck this, then updates will be executed. If not so, you cannot do anything. It will raise an error, which we have seen already. So I have just updated that Sarah to Mary. So if we again check what are the tables data, if you can see, Sarah is replaced with Mary. In this way, you can update. Yes, I don't want to update one row. Instead, I want to delete the row. What I can do for deleting a row, I have delete command. So delete from student. This is the table name. Where you want to delete? From the table. You need to specify the table name. Where you need to specify that where condition, where class, and you need to specify where SID is equal to 104. So if I want to delete a row in a table where SID is having 104, then you can just specify that SID equal to 104. Instead of 104, if I want to delete 102, you can just specify 102 here. So control enter. If you can see, that row has been deleted. And if you can check, select star from student. So 104 SID row has been deleted. In this way, you can create table, select data from the table, fetch all the data from the table, insert data into the table, update existing record. You can delete the existing record as well. So these are all the operations which we have seen through client. Nothing but a software used to connect to server. But if you want to do all these operations with the help of any programming language, how you can do? Right now, we are discussing about Python. So with the help of Python and with the help of connector, how I can connect to a server and how I can work with database. So to work with them, we need to just install one connector, MySQL connector Python. So this is the thing which you want to install. So go to PyCharm, click on File, click on Settings, go to Project in Python Interpreter, search for MySQL-connector. MySQL. You need to be very specific about the name. MySQL-connector-Python. So if you can see, this particular connector is highlighted, and just click on install. And when you click on the install button, it has successfully installed. Click on close, and if you can see, MySQL connector Python has been installed. This is the latest version which it is showing. So click on OK. Then what are the other things which you need to do? So for every steps to connect to database in any programming language, not only in Python, you are having 4 steps. One is creating a connection. After creating a connection, you need to create a statement. So like if you see here, so these are all the statements which are executing through client software. So these are all the statements which you need to prepare. You need to create, like for the insert query, for the update, for the delete, as well as for the select one. So in this way, you can create the queries. Like first, you need to create a connection. You need to create a statement. Nothing but insert, update, delete, and select statements. Similarly, after creating those statements, you need to execute those statements. Very important. And after executing, you need to close the connection of that particular database. So in which database you work, at the end of the day, you need to close the existing connection. So this is what you need to do. So what I'm doing, I'm just importing that connector and created the statements and just establishing a connection between the database and the programming language with the help of some variable con. So what I'm doing, for executing any statements, like whether it is insert, whether it is update, whether it is delete, whether it is select, you need to create a cursor. So cursor is a temporary storage area where you can store the data. So with the help of this, you can execute queries, whether it is a select query, whether it is an insert query, whether it is an update query or delete query or anything. So this is what you can do. And for select, it is not required to commit. If you update any data in the existing table, definitely you need to use commit. Means you need to save that particular transaction. Anything which you do on the table is nothing but a transaction. Once you update the existing data, you need to save that data. For saving that data which you have edited, you need to use commit. Connection.commit. So after connecting, after modifying the data, you can just commit that or save that particular transaction. Thereafter, at the end of the day, as we discussed, you need to close the existing connection to the database. In this way, you can work with databases. So let me do one thing. Let me copy this code, which I have already typed for your reference. So go to this day 34 folder and create a Python directory, nothing but day 34, and create a new Python file of DB operations. So these are the simple type of operations which you'll be seeing right now. In the similar way, you can do complex operations as well. So if you can see here, I have imported the connector MySQL.connector. So MySQL hyphen connector hyphen Python. From that, I have just importing that MySQL.connector. Just prepared the statements, and thereafter, what are the things which I'm executing? I have just kept that in the try and except blocks. Why? What is the reason to keep them? So if you see here, at the time of connecting to databases, if the database is down, suppose if any some patching activity is going on, or if it is restarting, or if it is not available, then you will get exceptions. So to handle exceptions, we have already discussed a try except block. So that is the reason inside the try except block, I have just kept the connection strings here. So if the database is down, if it is restarting, if it is not available, then exception will be coming. So I can handle that exceptions using try except block. So in this way, you need to specify. So first thing is you need to connect it to the database. So for connecting to any database, you have some parameters. One is host name, the other is port, who is the user, and the password of the particular user, and what is the database you are currently working on. If you can see here, the host is localhost because you have installed this particular database which you are working right now in your local machine. So that is the reason why you have specified localhost. But in a project, when you are working in a company, you will not use this localhost. As we have already discussed, a server and its all the parameters or the configurations will be installed on remote Linux machines, not on our local machines. So when you are working on that remote server, you need to just specify that host, which you will be giving you by the administrators, database administrators. What they will do, they will give you all the credentials. Instead of localhost, you need to specify that host address here. And they will also give you port, but right now in my local, I'm using 3306 as the port number, and I'm just using the root user. You need to specify that root. Similarly, the root user password is I have just given as root only. At the time of installation, I have just given you the root password, and this database is already created. So what I'm saying, I am just specifying that database. Use that MyDB database. So after establishing a connection, I need to initiate a cursor. What this cursor will do? Very important to understand this. Cursor is a temporary storage area which stores data returned from any statement, not only select. Whether if a statement is returning some data, to store that data, we need some temporary storage area. That is nothing but a cursor. You need to initialize that cursor as well. So with the help of that cursor, you can execute that select query. Right now, if you execute the select query here, you are seeing 3 rows. So what I'm doing with the help of this programming language, I'm just connected to the database and just checking what are the rows of data it is having. So if you can see here, I have specified all the thing and I'm just executing select query. What is the select query is having? Select star from student. So select all the rows and columns data or fetch all the data which is there in this particular student table. So right click on this and run DB operations. If you can see here, these are the 3 rows of data: 101, 102, 103, John, Emily, and Michael. So this is the data which you are seeing in the workbench client, MySQL workbench. So what you have done, you have just executed that. Yes, instead of this, I want all the rows at a time to be printed. What you can do, you can just execute like this. Set start from student. So this is the statement which we have given. So once you execute the SQL query, whatever the data returned is stored in cursor. So for accessing all the data, you need to use for loop. So row 0 is having 101 and row 1 is having the another column, nothing but yes name, SID and yes name. If you want to read the data, you need to specify the indexes. That's it. Then you take this as assignment. Instead of these values, you just try to insert the values which you want, and thereafter you can just execute that insert query with the help of cursor. Then after insert and after update, after delete, definitely you need to enable this commit. Means you need to save whatever the things which you do as a part of modifying or changing the existing data. You need to commit the transaction. Otherwise, the changes which you done will not be reflected in the database. Once you open any file, if you do any changes, you just click on that save. In the similar way, you just click on that commit here. You just pass that commit here after every transaction. Otherwise, the changes which you have done as a part of insert, update, and delete will not be reflected in that particular table. This is very important. Try this as an assignment. So, 4 parameters: creating connection, writing that statements, executing that, and closing that connection. So these are the 4 important things which we will be doing at the part of working with databases: creating connection, creating statement, executing the queries, and closing the existing connection. So these are the thumb rules which you need to remember for not only Python, for every database if you're working with any programming language. Then we will be moving to data-driven testing. Data-driven testing using Excel, we have already seen. What you have done, you have just specified the test data in the Excel file, and you know how to fetch the test data. Similarly, what you do here, you will specify the test data in the database, and during runtime, you will just execute some select statements, and you will just fetch that data, as similar to working with Excel only. Instead of specifying that your test data in Excel, you'll just specify it in the database. How you can specify? So before specifying, why we need to go to databases? If you have large set of data that needs to be tested, huge amount of data, so only one place, safe place and good place is database instead of Excel. So we'll go for database most times, but most of the times we'll have some less test data. You'll specify in the Excel files. So you should know how to work with Excel file and how you can fetch the data from the Excel files, which we have already seen in the previous class. Right now, you just specify the test data in the database and you will fetch that test data. So if you can see here, which we have already seen in the date 33 caldata.xlx. So in this particular Excel file, I have just specified the test data like this for the website. So what is the website which we are using here? This is the website. So in this particular website, you are having a calculator, nothing but a fixed deposit calculator. So in this fixed deposit calculator, you need to enter principal, rate of interest, and period and frequency. Thereafter, you need to click on this calculate button, which we have done when working with Excel files. What you have done for the data which you want to enter here, you have just specified the data in the Excel file. So instead of specifying the data in the Excel file, what you can do, you can just create a table in the database like this, and you can insert the data into database, and you can fetch the data during runtime. How you can do that? Close this Excel file, and almost the code which we are using for reading data for Excel files is same. We can just use a part of this code, and you can try to achieve whatever the things you can. So instead of this row count, all the operations with regarding to Excel, you can just fetch the data. How you can fetch the data from the database, we'll be seeing right now. And if you can see, these are the database operations. So first thing what we need to do, whatever the data in the Excel file which we have mentioned, you need to just store the data into the database. If you can see here, close this, create another SQL window, and in this SQL window, you can just specify the test data. So if you see in the Excel file, we have seen principal amount, period 1, period 2, frequency, and maturity value. So those are columns. In the similar way, you will just create a columns. And ID is an integer. So after executing or inserting a new row, it will be automatically incremented. So it is just for primary key. So there are some thumb rules when you are creating any table in the database. You need to have some primary key, foreign key, like this. I'm not going that much details here right now. So if you want, you can refer any online portals, you can get there. Right now, you will not create the data. Instead, the test data is already provided in the database by administrators. You can just fetch the data. If you want to customize that existing test data, then you can do it on your own instead of this creation. But for your understanding, we are just creating the data like this. So what I'm doing, use my DB. Yes, in this particular database only, use my DB. Yes, this is the database, my DB, and execute this. Yes, it has entered. And you just create a table, nothing but cal data. Table name is cal data. So this is the table. So copy this right now and specify this particular statement here. And if you can see, if you execute this, inside this MyDB, along with student, you will have another table, nothing but cal data. And I need to insert the data into this particular calculation data or cal data table, which is for this particular website. So what you can do, you can just use this insert commands. So if you want to insert data, you can specify that column names, principal, rate of interest, period 1, period 2, frequency, and maturity value. So because if you see here, I didn't specify any ID, because ID column is auto incremented. Every time when you insert a euro, it is auto incremented. But if you want the data only for the few columns to be inserted, then you can specify the columns like this. So insert into table name, and you can specify the column names, and you can specify the values for each and every column. What is the value? Likewise, multiple data, multiple values. Then before going to insert the data, we'll just see what is the data present in this particular table. If you can see, up to now we have not inserted any data. So control enter. If you can see, there is no data. All are null. There is no data. This is what you are seeing as like in the Excel. So if you want to insert data, you can just use this particular insert command. Whatever the data in the Excel file, we are just inserting the data here. That's it. If you can see here, this particular data I have been inserting here. And if you again select the data, see, after inserting, these are all the data, the rows and columns data, which you will be finding here. So principal, rate of interest, period 1, period 2, frequency, maturity value. So what you need to do, you need to just fetch the data from the database during runtime. Like how you fetch the data, tester data from the Excel files during runtime from the Excel file. Instead of Excel file, you have just hosted the data in the database. So you should know how to connect to the database and how you fetch the data from the database. This is what we need to do. So simply, I am just using the fixed deposit calculator only, which we have already used when working with Excel files. So instead of this, you need to specify the file name and specifying that functions in the util files. What you can do, you can just establish a connection to the database instead of this, and with the help of that, you can just fetch that data. How you can fetch that data? So let me create a file, Python file of fixed deposit calculator, fixed deposit calculator. So this is what the Python file is. And what I'm doing, I'm just using the existing code which I have already used when working with Excel files. I'm just closing this. And if you can see, these are the data operations. Yes. So if you can see here, I have just read the data during runtime with the help of this util file. So instead of this, what you can do, there is data already specified in the database. So you need to fetch the data. How you can fetch the data? So for fetching the data, you need to first establish a connection. That's it. First, establish a connection. So to establish a connection, definitely you need to use try and except blocks. That is fine. And instead of this, I need to import MySQL connector. Instead of Excel util file, I can just import MySQL connector. That's it. If I import, there is no error here. And I can specify the host, port, user, root, database as well. And I'm just executing what is the data present in the cal data table. I'm just executing this select query. So upon executing, you can just fetch the data like this. So all the operations which you are doing it here, these should be inside the try except blocks. If you are seeing here, you need to specify inside try except blocks. Very important. So let me try to rearrange this, nothing but reformat this. If you can see here, I'm just executing this. Yes, cursor. And for each and every row, you'll be having column. And for each and every column, you are just fetching the values. So likewise, which you have already seen whenever working with Excel files. So when you want principal data, rate of interest, period 1, period 2, frequency, maturity value, you have done the same. You have just called the respective methods. So instead of that calling, what I have done, I have just specified the column numbers here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's what you are seeing here. So these are the columns. So I have just called that columns data right now. So instead of this, what you can do, you can just copy this, the same which we have already written. So I'm just copying it here. What you are doing, the same program. Control V. So what you can do, you can rearrange this. Yes. So if you can see, let me copy this and paste it here so that you can understand even more. Copy. It is very easy only, so there is no need of any confusion. This program is already we have written. So if you can see, let me comment this. Let me comment this past data to the application. What you are doing it here. So you can see. So you are just fetching the principal data, rate of interest, period 1, period 2, frequency, as like in the fixed deposit calculator of Excel working. In the similar way, you have just fetched the data during runtime. And after fetching the data, you are just passing to particular field, as like in the Excel data driven testing. And thereafter, you are just checking whether, one second, let me comment this as well. Read data from the cursor. Yes, very important. So whether the expected value which you have got is equal to actual value or not, you are just checking that. So if you can see here, I'm just rearranging this. It is very important before working. So, and thereafter, if it is equal, then if you can see it here, you can just perform the clear operation as well. So let me rearrange this again. Very important. This is Control Z. Very important. You need to be very careful about the indentation. So like this, you need to perform a proper indentation. Otherwise, you'll get an error. This is validation, and this is time.sleep and except. You can see it here, and I have just used the same which we have already used. Yes, that's it. So what you are doing, for each and every row, you are just iterating the row as like in Excel, and you are just passing the data to the particular row. And if the actual value is equal to the expected value, you are just printing that test is passed. So if there is any issue with the connection, then this except block will be executed and it will say connection unsuccessful. Maybe there is some issue. You can think of that and you can try to figure out that issue. And thereafter, after performing all the things, you can just close that particular driver. So this is the same which we are using in the data-driven testing of Excel. There is no need of confusion. You are just getting the data from the Excel. Instead of that Excel, you are just getting the data from database just by establishing a connection and just by executing some selector statement. That's it. Right click, run fixed deposit calculator. So if you can see here, it has opened this particular website. Yes, it is entering the data. Halt it for 2 seconds. Again, entering the data, clearing. And if you can see, at last it is executed. So what is the expected value? What is the total value? If expected value is equal to total value, then the test is passed. If it is not equal, then the test is failed. This is what we have seen whenever we are dealing with data-driven testing with Excel file. In the similar way, you can just specify whether the test is passed or not if expected and actual are matching. In this way, you can connect to database, you can fetch the data, you can pass the data to the application, and you can do data-driven testing.